It was my second trip to Hogwarts that month, and apparently my presence hadn't been as subtle as I'd hoped. "That's not to say you're not welcome, of course," McGonagall said, who'd insisted I call her Minerva when I found her in the library, but if I couldn't bring myself to call Trelawney anything but Professor, I doubted I could manage it for my former head of house. It's just odd, you understand, for repeat visitors in the middle of term. I understand. Honestly, there were probably better places to look for this particular book. As I recall, the Hogwarts library didn't have an especially wide array of fiction. Fiction? The sun slanted through the windows at a steep angle, but it was only 5:15 in the evening, despite being near dusk. It was November, I supposed. Still, the library was well lit, with 1,000 candles floating near the ceiling, and a few disparate groups of students were, by turns, studying in groups or staring at their headmistress and auspicious guest as they passed. "Have you heard of J. William Cross?" I asked. "Heard of him? I own 2 of his books." Her answer caught me off guard, though I wasn't sure why. "Do you?" "I wouldn't call myself a great fan of horror, generally, but after reading a review of his debut in The Prophet, I couldn't resist. I do so love when the monster is a metaphor." I turned the new information over in my head a few times. "Would it surprise you if I said that J. William Cross was actually the pen name of Draco Malfoy?" It would, apparently, and did. She raised both eyebrows at me and straightened her back. "Is it?" I nodded, and McGonagall's gaze unfocused, trailing forward to the window at the far end of the library. My, she eventually said, and then did not elaborate. "I'm investigating the circumstances of his, well, I suppose the word is disappearance. For now." "He's disappeared?" "Abruptly and mysteriously. And I presume, if you're involved in the investigation, dark magic is suspected." "I'm not ruling anything out as of yet." 2 Hufflepuffs at a nearby table spun toward each other as we made our way past it, whispering frantically. "But the case is complex, and I think it would be useful if I read his books, if only to get a better idea of the man he became after the war." "You're in for a dismal picture, then," McGonagall answered grimly. "Knowing the identity of the author contextualizes his work in a way I think you'll pick up on." I frowned. "Does it?" "And as it happens, we do stalk a few of his books, just a few. His subject matter gets rather dark, inappropriate for school-age children, you understand." She took my elbow and turned me, rather abruptly, down an aisle to our left, leaving the Hufflepuffs behind, their whispers fading to silence in the muffling cavern of the shelves. The library did have a fiction section, though not one which was particularly impressive. A bookcase and a half altogether, the authors divided between Muggle and magical. In my days as a student, I'd never spent very much time with it, though Ron had been known to pick up the occasional novel. As we came back to it, I examined the labels on the shelves and wondered if it was my imagination, or if the section had expanded by a few racks in the years after my departure. "Here." When I looked back at McGonagall, she was handing me a thin, leather-bound tome with gold embossing on its spine and cover. "What fills the void that's left behind?" The words were long and jagged, and made me think of dead, gnarled trees. I took it without thinking. "We also have an anthology of his poetry, if you're interested." "Poetry?" I looked up, startled. "Poetry," she confirmed. "I actually prefer his poems to his novels, but they weren't what got him his Silver Quill Award." Wow. Even I, by no means a reader, knew that a Silver Quill was an auspicious award to receive. Only one was given out per year, and to any magical fiction published in Europe. I don't think I realized he was quite so accomplished. "His works are gripping," McGonagall assured me, "but very dark, and they never end happily. I suppose it would be difficult, ending stories like those in any other way. Of course, you're welcome to borrow this copy. Just have Irma check it out under my name." It took me a moment to recall that Irma was actually the cantankerous librarian, Madame Pince. I almost made a remark about how I was surprised she hadn't retired, but resisted. She was about the same age as McGonagall, if I recalled. Right. Thank you, I appreciate it. But, as you've already deduced, McGonagall continued, peering at me over her spectacles, any other library in the country would have more of his works to choose from. What brings you all the way to Hogwarts twice in as many weeks? My gaze dropped back down to the cover. J. William Cross was written in small letters at the very bottom, as well as Silver Quill recipient, 2014. I'm stalling, actually. Stalling? There's something I need to do here, and I'm not looking forward to it. I thought I might wander the castle for a while, work up the nerve. From the corner of my eye, I could see McGonagall frowning sympathetically. Is there anything I can do to help? No, I said, wishing that I could say yes. No, I fear this is something I have to do alone. I had perhaps stalled too long. By the time I made it to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, only the last fading rays of gloaming were visible over the horizon, and the forest itself felt like an impenetrable wall of darkness. Just go, I told myself, and didn't. I'd tried very hard to talk myself out of this. I'd searched for other methods to part the veil between life and death, obscure spells, dangerous artifacts, and hit a wall down every avenue. Those ideas which didn't lead to quackery led to myth and legend. There was only one way I knew of to speak easily with the dead, and I'd left it in this forest nearly 20 years ago. Go, I said again, and my legs moved reluctantly. One step, then another, then another. The ambient noise of the Scottish Highlands, wind through tall grass, distant birdsong, thrumming bush crickets, all faded the deeper I went. Sound and light and heat all dissipated, swallowed up by the forest. I had no trouble finding it, though I almost wished I would have, wished that every moment of those few horrible hours weren't seared into my mind like a brand. I wished I couldn't recreate the path I took out of the Forbidden Forest after letting myself die, as though I'd walked it 1,000 times before. It felt unjust, somehow, that every single second of the worst day of my life had left such indelible marks in my soul. I came to the clearing and stopped, swallowed. It was so dark here, the looming, spindly trees visible only by the voids they left behind on the dark grey sky. Harry? I wanted to sob. Didn't. Mum. I turned, and there she was, slightly transparent, just a little bit hazy around the edges. God, she looked so young. I suppose she was. She'd been younger than I was now when she died. Darling, she said, and sounded confused. You're grown. Harry, came another voice from behind. I turned again and saw my father, so like me in my early 20s, though a few scars the less. What is this? What happened? God, this was hard. I'd known it would be, and I'd done it anyway. I'm sorry to pull you back. I promise I wouldn't have if I didn't have a good reason. Harry? I didn't want to look. I didn't want to remember, to see him, to dredge up all those memories, tainted by his loss. Sirius, I forced myself to say. The name was a razor coming up my throat. I turned, and there he was, my godfather, just the same as the day he died. I was about his age now, wasn't I? "Hey," he said. He looked confused. "Hi," I answered, then swallowed a horrible knot of agony. More of them were appearing now, fading into the air like mist rising off the surface of a pond. Fred, Remus and Tonks, Dumbledore, Snape, Moody, Cedric, even Hedwig, perched on a nearby branch and craning her head around as if perplexed. I felt sick. "Sorry," I said, voice ruined. "Lumos." The tip of my wand lit up blue-white, passing straight through their hazy figures. I forced my eyes down. The dark underbrush illuminated, and I only had to scan through the twigs and dead leaves for a few moments before the light caught on something shiny, wedged underneath a root. I crouched down and worked it out with trembling fingers. Even after so long in the dirt, it looked flawless, gleaming black, humming against my skin. The resurrection stone. "You're courting danger, Mr. Potter," said a voice I hadn't heard since the Battle of Hogwarts. I looked up, and the hazy, not quite opaque figure of Severus Snape stood over me. My stomach rolled. "Are you finally at peace?" I wanted to ask. "Did you earn your redemption?" I wanted to ask, and "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. In hindsight, you deserved it." "I know," was what I did say, voice tremulous, and stood and stepped backward, because it hurt to look at him, but I could not look away. "I know. I'm sorry." "Darling," my mother said, "whatever you're doing, are you sure it's worth it?" I think so. I hoped so. I hoped so desperately, frantically, that this agony would be worth it. If there was any part of Draco Malfoy left to save, if I could take his name off the long list of my failures, perhaps this would be worth it. "One does not part the veil of death lightly, Harry," Dumbledore told me patiently. I know that." His blue eyes sparkled even in death. His half-moon spectacles glinted. This was unbearable. A life is on the line. It was as much a reminder for myself as it was a justification, the last fragile thread holding me together. "Have you forgiven yourself for what you did to me, Headmaster?" "Be careful," Sirius said. "Have you forgiven me for what I did to you?" I apparated straight back to Grimmauld Place. I tucked the resurrection stone into a drawer and an end table in the corner of the house. Then I ran upstairs into my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. Then I waited, breathless, for them to reappear, those ghosts of my past. But they didn't. Then, and only then, did I slide to the floor and break down into wretched, wrenching sobs. That was a Friday, with the next phase of the investigation to begin the following Monday. I spent the intervening weekend trying as hard as I could to stay far, far away from London. I thought about going to stay with Ron and Hermione, but didn't. I considered going to the Burrow to let Molly dote on me, but didn't. I couldn't convince myself that I'd earned the comfort of my friends and family. I wandered Diagon for a while, staring into store windows without seeing the merchandise on display. I apparated to the sunny Falmouth seaside, where Ginny and I had gotten married, walked the length of the beach through frigid, biting wind. I took the bus to Leicester and got off in Highfields, walked down Skipworth Street, where Dudley and his wife, Elaine, were visible through their front window watching a match on the telly, then kept going without knocking. When I got hungry, I found a restaurant and ate. When I got tired, I found a hotel and slept. Then, on Sunday evening, I read. What Fills the Void That's Left Behind was about a woman named Caroline Sharp, who, when the story began, had just lost her husband to a sudden stroke. Conveniently, however, Caroline came from a family of necromancers. All her life, she'd eschewed the magic that had made her family so infamous. She'd seen it used to ruinous effect during Gellert Grindelwald's war in Eastern Europe by her own parents. But now, suddenly, she was tempted. Her sister warned her against it. Even her parents agreed, reminding her that while life could be forced into a corpse, it would not and could not be the same life that had already left it. But in her grief, she ignored the warnings and brought her husband back from the dead. And, of course, he came back wrong. He did not walk, he shambled. He did not speak, he screamed. He did not kiss her, hold her, he bit her and clawed her flesh. And Caroline told herself over and over that it was enough. She tried so hard to make it enough, sedating him with calming draughts and tying him up at night so she could curl against his thrashing body. Then he began to kill. Cats first, then children in the hamlet, then Caroline's own sister. The other villagers burned her house down and ran them out of town. The book ended with a suicide pact at the edge of a cliff. "We'll jump together," she told the monster wearing the shape of her husband. "At least we will be together in death then." But he did not jump. He tore her throat out with his teeth and left her bleeding on the cliffside. She died, and he continued on for 1,000 violent, unnatural years, and their souls never reunited. I finished the book in the small hours of Monday morning. It was hardly a wonder it had won an award so prestigious. The writing was as wholly consuming as quicksand. The image of Caroline, lifeblood pouring from her open throat, made my skin crawl, but did not, I acknowledged, really frighten me. Primarily, it made me sad. I wasn't quite sure why. It was too early for snow, but frost had overtaken the Malfoy Manor when next I saw it, the windows hazy with it, the roof glittering with it, the grass crunching with it under my feet. "Like Dante's devil, trapped in ice," remarked the translucent figure of Severus Snape over my shoulder. I had avoided the sitting room for as long as I could, but of course that had only been a few days in the end. I'd searched the fucking stone out for a reason. Still, I squeezed my eyes shut and tried not to shiver at the sound of my dead potion professor's voice. "We're not going in there, are we?" Remus asked me. "I've been to the Malfoy Manor once before," Tonks said slowly. "I hadn't ever wanted to return." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Please, just let me do this." "This building has known great evil," Dumbledore said. "I can feel it lingering like a stain." "It's not too late to walk away, son," my father said. Harry, don't go in there." "Potter, please," I hissed, and my hands shook. "Please, just let me do this." "Harry, this is foolish. Potter has experience taught you so little." Harry, stop!" I screamed, and when I opened my eyes, Narcissa Malfoy was in front of me, recoiling in fear toward the front steps she'd just descended. Guilt crushed my chest like a vise. "I'm sorry," I gasped. For some reason, I was winded. My vision swam. "I'm so sorry, Narcissa. I didn't realize you were there." The pupils of her pellucid blue eyes had blown wide. "Are you well?" "Yes, I looked over my shoulder. I could see them all still, grim spectres hovering around me, staring, but finally silent. When I looked back at Narcissa, her attention was unwavering. Apparently they were only visible to me. "Yes, I'm fine. My apologies for startling you." My heart still hammered, a persistent throbbing drumbeat behind my ribs. I hoped it didn't show, though by the way Narcissa continued to stare, I was willing to bet that it did. It's quite all right. I know you weren't expecting me, Something crinkled. My eyes dropped to her hands, thin fingers and pale skin wrapped in black lace gloves, holding a piece of parchment with a broken wax seal. I realized a few nights ago that this might be relevant to your investigation. What might? She visibly screwed up her courage before approaching, black kitten heels leaving small tracks in the frost, and held it out to me. "Oh, Narcissa," Snape sighed behind me. "I'm so sorry. You are too young to mourn like this." I grit my teeth and ignored him, taking the proffered parchment from her. "I first received it from him late last month," Narcissa explained. "At the time, I didn't think much of it. Draco would send me his poems from time to time. He knew I enjoyed them. It wasn't until after the fact that I realized. A house that eats, a ghost that weeps, tangled up in blood-soaked sheets. A lie that kills and slowly fills the bloodline with its bitter pills. Too long abed with ghosts with dread drives knives into my throat and head. But still I stall and haunt this hall. There's nothing left of me at all." I frowned. Reading it made my skin tingle with nervous tension that I couldn't quite explain. "What is this?" "With the clarity of hindsight," Narcissa answered, voice wavering, "I think it might be a suicide note." "God!" Had he, I folded the parchment back up again, dropped my hand to my side. Had he been struggling? With those sorts of thoughts, I mean. "I don't know," she admitted, as though the words were a confession that lived in the darkest corner of her soul. "I didn't notice it if he was, though perhaps I was a bit willfully ignorant. It's hard, you understand, for a mother to accept her child as going down roads so dark. If I could go back, do it all again, I know. I would too. Would you?" She sniffed once, schooled her expression, and wiped so delicately in her eye that one would be forgiven for assuming she was brushing away a snowflake and not a tear. "I know you and he rather famously disliked each other." "You weren't the only one who saved my life back during the war," I said. "Many risked much to assure your success," Dumbledore remarked, a voice grim. "Many risked everything." I squeezed my eyes shut again, resisting the urge to once again beg them all to stop. "I'll leave you to it," Narcissa said, and I could tell by her tone that she was worried I might snap a second time. "Be careful, Harry. The house elf I've been sending round to clean it out has reported some strange things occurring." She left before I could ask her to elaborate, though I doubted I could have forced the words out in any case. I was too busy trying to talk myself out of throwing the bloody resurrection stone down a storm drain somewhere. "You need it," I reminded myself again and again like a prayer. "You need it." I went inside. The doors had been left standing ajar all week long, and the flagstone floors of the entryway were scattered with dead leaves and slick with frost near the entrance. With the majority of its wards abandoned, the heat had entirely evacuated the building, and it was just as frigid inside as it was outside. I shuddered out a breath, and it passed through my lips as a wisp of white mist. "Don't tell me you're scared," Sirius said behind me. I dared not look at him. I could not bear it. "Of course I'm scared." Fear had been my constant companion for many years. I could no sooner do away with it than I could a limb. "This place is evil," Moody growled. I went slowly up the steps, and though the spectres went quiet, I knew they were still there, hovering along behind me. In a way, they always had been. Their losses were as heavy on my soul now as they were the day they died. The only difference now was that they could berate me. "Turn back," my father said, and I didn't. I reached the top of the stairs and turned. At the end of the hallway, Backlit by the hazy silver light of a cloudy autumn mid-morning, stood a shadow. It was tall, so tall that it had to bend unnaturally to one side just to fit under the 10-foot ceiling. I could make out none of its features but its hands, which twitched and jerked and curled and uncurled. The air around it seemed to quiver and hiss. Was this the Resurrection Stone's doing? Had it summoned some shade from beyond the veil? Or what had Trelawney said about a darkness in the house that beat like a heart? I drew my wand.
"Put that away."
I drew a breath and jerked my head around. At some point I had stopped outside Malfoy's bedroom. There was something moving inside. I looked back to the end of the hall. The shadow was gone, though my heart still hammered as though it was right behind me. "I'm not a child anymore. You can't tell me what to do." I went into the bedroom. To my surprise, one of the ghosts from the séance was standing in the corner. Armand, wasn't it? With his arms folded over his frock coat and his expression disapproving. I followed his gaze to the bed. Malfoy was on it. "What?" I said, stunned. Then, "Malfoy!" But Malfoy didn't look at me. He was half-dressed, curled over himself, and digging the point of a shiny silver knife into his forearm. My stomach dropped. "Malfoy!" I lurched toward him, making for the knife. My hand passed right through, met only with a rush of cold air like I'd stepped through a ghost. I watched, helpless and horrified, as Malfoy dragged the knife down his arm, teeth grit in pain but expression determined.
"He won't stop,"
Armand the ghost said.
"I couldn't stop him the first time, and I can't stop him now either."
I looked up at him frantically, then back to Malfoy. His pale skin was splitting open wide, fountaining dark arterial blood onto the sheets, which spread to match the stains already extant on the bed. "What?" I said, then could not finish.
"He vacillates," Armand explained disdainfully, "between reliving bad memories and writhing in nightmares. Sometimes he hears me, most times he doesn't."
"It's for the best anyway," Malfoy said, and switched the knife to his other hand. Though his expression was set, his voice betrayed him, wobbling with tremendous grief. "So this is—" I began.
"The night he resolved to end his own life," Armand said. "Yes. Such a waste, spilling blood so pure."
Slashing open the arm of his dominant hand seemed more of a struggle. Poor coordination made the incision jagged, and blood loss made it shallow. Nearly 20 years as an Auror, and this was perhaps the worst thing I'd ever been forced to witness. "You were there." Finally, I forced my eyes up to Armand. "Why didn't you tell Narcissa about this?"
"To what end, half-blood?" he asked loftily. "To magnify a mother's grief?"
"To give her closure." Armand shook his head.
This would not have offered closure. Nothing possibly could. She had no body to bury, no family to grieve with her, and no answers. Though I suppose there could never be an answer sufficient for a question like this."
Malfoy made a horrible, agonized sound and collapsed backward, tangled up in white sheets as they slowly turned red. He wore little more than a long, open nightshirt, laying bare the expanse of his pale, heaving chest. He stared, grey eyes unfocused, at the ceiling.
"It's for the best," he wheezed.
"So he's dead then," I said, voice as heavy as my heart.
"I don't know," Armand answered, sounding thoughtful, almost maudlin. "I've haunted this manor for centuries. Lords Malfoy have come and gone many times under my watchful eye, but this did not proceed as it usually does." "Just let it be over," Malfoy said like he was begging. "Just leave me be, Shade." "When I first heard him say that," Armand said, "I thought he was talking to me."
I frowned. If he hadn't been talking to Armand, then... From above, something hissed. I looked up with a jerk, then stumbled backward and fell. The same shadow from the hallway was splayed across the ceiling, 2 long limbs stretched from wall to hold it up, head bent unnaturally against one shoulder. I tried to scream but couldn't. I had no breath left.
It draws more misery from him every time, Armand said.
The shadow dropped slowly, limb by limb. I could not get my vision to focus on it, as though it was somehow too far and too close to me at the same time. But I could see it plainly enough as it unhinged its jaw and dove for Malfoy as if to swallow him whole. No! But he was already gone, along with the shadow. Only the stains remained. My heart thumped wildly against my ribs. My breath came fast and ragged.
You know, Armand remarked, voice smiled, for all the breathers who've come and gone in recent weeks, you're the first to see him so clearly. Whatever magic you've brought with you is powerful. It splits the veil and calls the darkness out. A whole new meaning to l'appel du vide.
My eyes still moved frantically up and down the now empty bed as if my heart could not accept that he was gone. You said... I swallowed hard, forced my eyes up to Armand. You said he hears you sometimes.
I suspect it's because I am familiar. I helped to raise him, after all, and I'm sure it doesn't hurt that I am also dead.
Armand, isn't it?
Lord Armand Beauchamp de Malfoy III to you, half-blood, the late Viscount Rockford, though that title holds little meaning these days.
Armand, I said, I think I need your help.